DealQuest Community. This is another solo cast, and I want to talk about, I read recently, I'm recording this in early May, obviously be released later, but, one of the articles that I read that somebody on the team pointed out to me, and I read, we try to keep up with, the deals that are going on out there, is in Forbes Business. There was an article, and I'm sure many of the other publications have reported on it, on the failure or the failed merger of First Horizon with TD Bank. So, a while back, TD Bank and First Horizon announced that they were going to merge. TD Bank was essentially going to take over First Horizon. And just now, recently, early May, they've announced that the deal's off. Okay. So I want to talk about, a few factors specific to this particular deal, the impact of that merger not going forward, especially for First Horizon, and the conditions under which, but then also sort of, what lessons and what things it raises in terms of M&A deals in general that may more, impact you as a listener, or any business that may be doing deals. So, the deal was announced a while ago. I think it was supposed to be $25 a share was the amount of, of the offer, I believe. And I wasn't able to easily check. I'm sure I could do some research. But usually, what happens, especially in these public deals, is that the offer price that the public company makes for the seller is at a price per share that's higher than what it's trading at currently. If there's not a premium, there's usually not a reason to sell. So I'm assuming that First Horizon was trading at below 25 a share when TD Bank came in and made the offer. And listen, one of the things we have to think about is what's happening in the banking space in recent times. I mean, the original TD offer was well before Signature Bank, First Republic, and Signature Valley, Bank and First Republic, when there were all these other issues that happened. So the whole landscape has changed, and obviously that's good. Bank valuations have gone down based upon some, concerns, although thankfully it seems like there's not a huge contagion, and hopefully the whole banking industry will continue to be okay. But with the, with the bank collapses and whatever, obviously, there's been a pressure on share prices going down. So if for a bank like TD to hold to an offer that they previously made under different conditions, it's not surprising that they pulled the deal. Now, what's interesting is one of the things this article says, and I'm looking at it here, is that in its agreement, TD Bank will pay First Horizon $200 million in cash and $25 million in reimbursement of fees. So it sounds like there was some breakup. So this is probably something called a breakup clause, where once an agreement is signed, if the deal is not closed prior to closing, unless of course there's some issue, some breach of rep, or covenant or something that came up with First Horizon, which if it was the case, TD wouldn't be paying a breakup fee. But if somebody wants to walk from the deal, there's a cost to it. And the reason for a breakup fee, especially in a public deal, is that, once the deal's announced, right, this expectation is going to hopefully go through. The seller is put into play. Everybody knows that they were looking to sell and did agree to a sale. There's it can really be damaging to them if the deal doesn't go through. So to compensate them somewhat, right, there's an agreement that the buyer will pay a breakup fee if they don't go forward. So I'm assuming that's what the $200 million in cash and $25 million in reimbursement fees. So they had a reimbursed cost plus $200 million. Now, the interesting part is to show you how it could be really an adverse effect in these public deals. First, Horizon's shares went down 40%. So from 15 to below 9 is what it says. So obviously they were trading at 15. Now, I don't know, like I said before, I'm not sure whether they were trading before TD made the offer, and maybe they were trading below 25, but obviously it's very possible that share price went down because of recent events as well. So, maybe the gap between the 25 offer and what the share price is now is much bigger than it was, and that's another reason they left. So First Horizon gets this money, but at the same time, they've taken this hit on their share price. Now, hopefully they can build it back up. But there's now that everybody knows that they've been in play, that they thought they're going to be bought. And what happens in that case is a lot of times there's a lot of focus on the deal, and maybe there's certain business initiatives and things and, innovations and growth and other things, investment that they haven't made because they anticipate doing the deal, which could adversely affect their performance going forward. They're going to have to sort of, rebound. And now the reason, by the way, that was given for this nod, they put out a joint statement, TD Bank and First Horizon. And the reason they gave was that they said they could not secure a timetable for regulatory approvals. But then it says, though their shares had fallen well below the $2 to $25 price, as what I said. So, who knows how much that regulatory piece of it really played into it. Maybe there was a real concern the regulators were taking too long. But, my guess is if market conditions didn't change adversely, that would be less of a concern, right? Certainly if market conditions stayed strong, although it's frustrating that it's taking long with the regulators, there are plenty of deals that get delayed due to regulators and then, go forward. So my guess is that, although they said that, the change in conditions made a big difference. So, listen, as you would expect, the CEO of First Horizon, Brian Jordan, said that, it was unfortunate and unexpected, the fact that it didn't go through and that they're going to continue its growth path, operating from a position of strength and stability. Well, hopefully for them, that's the case. There are certainly deals, that are done because the seller is having some trouble. But there are many deals done with, high quality sellers who could be fine on their own. They're not selling out of any desperation or because they have any need. It's just, they're selling purely out of opportunity, but they can continue to do well on their own. It's just that a lot of times, there's a hit. Maybe there is a question in confidence when a deal fails. It's possible that maybe some key executives or other employees, because of the merger, might have looked for other employment if they didn't think that they were going to be, interested in coming along or have the opportunity to come along, and maybe they'd be made, redundant. So sometimes you lose talent, and this is where I want to start relating it, not only to this deal, but, if you're thinking about doing a deal, what the implications of it can be by falling apart. Because even if you're not public and everything's publicly known, if the word has gotten out, there's any been kind of announcement that your clients are aware of, or even if it's not publicly announced, but your employees are aware that the company's in play, you have these same kind of risks. And sometimes it's harder to recover from that, even if, if you're a privately held smaller company. So again, sometimes employees start leaving, looking for other employment, or even if they haven't, they become concerned or disillusioned or worried or, maybe less productive, right? Because of the distraction, and maybe they are looking at other opportunities, even if they haven't found one yet. So that sometimes happens. It can certainly happen with customers and clients. Again, I don't know if there were any of the First Horizon depositors and others who, if for any reason they weren't excited about merging into a bigger bank, or they had maybe prior issues with TD. I'm not saying that this is true, but it happens a lot of times where, in anticipation of potential merger, there's, some disruption. There'll be some depositors or others, customers of the bank leave. And now they have another relationship. Or maybe now, that they might be concerned about why the deal didn't go through. And maybe there are other reasons that TD isn't mentioning in the joint statement, right? That maybe, especially in this environment when things are shaky with other banks, maybe it makes them think, oh, maybe there's something TD found out and they're not really talking about that would raise concerns. So, it's an interesting thing, in deals. And listen, it's one of the reasons that in deals you have NDAs, non-disclosures, because you try to keep it quiet. It's one of the reasons why many, many sellers will limit the number of employees who are aware that the deal is going forward until at least much later in the process, until at least there's a signed contract. But here there was a signed deal. It just didn't close, right? So, there's always risk of that, at some point. And there are times when companies even don't let many of their employees know, or even the customers know, until even after, until they get much closer out of closing, as opposed to just signing. See, in a public deal, there are disclosure requirements with the SEC, essentially, where, if you sign a deal, you have to disclose it. But in a private company, you don't necessarily have to do that, right? There's no obligation to tell customers or clients. Now, at some point, it may be good business, it may be appropriate, right? But there's always this balance about who you need to be involved, help get the deal done or to produce the due diligence and things like that. And, the risk of, internal people whispering, speaking, office scuttlebutt, gossip, that kind of stuff. It's hard to keep the word in. And especially, you may not, most of the time, don't want it to get out to your clients and customers until you're ready to announce it, position it properly so that they don't get worried about disruption, so that they don't get maybe misinformation or a misimpression, so that you don't have the opportunity. You want to have that opportunity to spin it. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but, present it in a way that you want to do it. And if you're doing a deal, you should believe, if you're a good business person, an ethical business person, that it's going to be to the benefit of everybody, not only in your own pockets, but it's going to be good for the customer. It's good for the employees. And we know that's not always the case, but hopefully it is. But in any case, in any scenario, you're going to want to try to control the messaging and the timing of the messaging. So you do NDAs, you limit what, who knows until they need to know. You make strategic decisions on when you're going to, disclose it. But there's always a risk if a deal falls apart, because certain people know already, maybe where it's gotten out a little more. If you're getting shopped by an investment bank or in a process, so it's not just, let's say, a single firm that it's approached you, even though that process is confidential and there are NDAs in that process. If you're getting bids from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, suitors, for example, which is, not uncommon, then there are more and more people who know what's going on, and it's easier for things to slip out there. And, frankly, NDAs are important. You should have them, but they're often hard to enforce, right? The word gets sort of out there. You don't know where it came from necessarily. So it's interesting. And the other thing is, in private deals, there's usually not a breakup fee, right? But then again, there's often not as much of a right to get out of the deal. But frankly, if you're a seller and your buyer backs out, your option is to sue them for damages, or if, depending on what your contract says, for example, if arbitration might be the dispute resolution process, you would go to arbitration. And one of the advantages, there are a lot of people who don't like arbitration for various reasons, but one of the advantages is that arbitration can be private. Whereas if you have to sue a company in court, that becomes a public record. So maybe nobody knew you were in play as a potential seller prior to the deal, but if you have to sue a buyer because they defaulted and walked from a deal that they were obligated to close, then not only do you incur the cost of litigation and have to deal with all that and go after the buyer, but it also has the risk of becoming, public and putting you in play that way. Because if you're willing to do one deal, then you're probably, at least open to, or maybe you were looking to actively shop the company to other buyers as well. So it raises those risks. Now, I will tell you, obviously the fall majority of deals, actually you don't end up in this situation. I always say to clients, the deal's not closed till it's closed, and that's really true. But it is a minority of deals that don't end up going through, especially but we talked about this a little bit in the past in various episodes, especially if the due diligence is done before signing an agreement. So, we've said sometimes you sign subject to due diligence is done afterwards, and then there's a closing period. Well, that is much more risky in terms of having a deal not go through, because the buyer, usually both sides, but it's, much more so on the buyer, has an out if there's things they don't like in due diligence. So the signed contract, the asset purchase agreement, the equity purchase, stock purchase, the merger agreement, whatever it is not a firm agreement really if there's a due diligence out, because that's usually pretty broad. Right. Sometimes there are reasons to do it that way, but in terms of this risk of a deal not going through and a potential downside especially to a seller, if the deal doesn't go through, from that point of view, it's definitely better to have all due diligence done before there's a signed agreement, because then, that's out of the way, right? And there's now not a due diligence contingency. Both signings of the agreement, the purchase agreement, is, much more solid, more binding. It doesn't have as many contingencies. Obviously, your representations and warranties still have to be true. They can't be things that they find out that are problematic. But if you've done a good job, been honest, and work with, good counsel, your reps and warranties are going to be accurate, right? You're going to schedule any issues that up front so that they don't become breaches. So, the timing of due diligence can play into that as a factor. to try to decrease the chances of a deal not going through post signing agreement, pre-closing. It's always interesting to look at these public mergers, just because it's interesting to see what the big players are doing. There are sometimes different factors, like I said, but a lot of times we can learn lessons for the private deals, which is mainly where we focus. We've done some public company stuff, mainly where we're representing sellers who are selling to public companies. And it's only because public companies use huge law firms. It's just the nature of public companies on who they work with. So we tend to, if we're involved in any deal that has, a public entity, it's usually where they're on the buy side and we're on the sell side, representing the private company, selling to the public company. But more of our deals that, are between private entities, but that doesn't mean that some of these issues don't come up. So, and I would say that the public deals actually have a higher percentage of, and I wonder if there's stats on this, because this is just anecdotal for me, but I think there's a higher percentage of those deals that may not go through because they are very public, because, there are going to be fluctuations in the stock market, because many times there are regulatory approvals that are needed if it's in a regulated industry, or there could be antitrust restrictions, although antitrust has, enforcement or, has not been, I think, in the past, there was strong antitrust review. Nowadays, even whether it's Republican or Democratic oversight, there are some cases where, where it's been affected or, they haven't approved it. Certainly you see in Europe as well, where there has been stuff approved for antitrust reasons, or where they say they'll only approve it if you sell off certain assets. But, that's, even though it's not as robust of enforcement as it was maybe at one time, it still comes into play, whereas that's really almost never an issue in privately held deals, certainly not smaller and middle market deals, right? Because they don't raise antitrust issues. So there are more reasons why deals may not go through in a public deal, but, it certainly happened. It does happen in private deals, and you got to look at the implications of that, and you got to try to strategize, and we help people do this in terms of minimizing those implications, not only after the fact, but up front through strategic decisions on who are you going to reveal the deal to, timing of due diligence, not, NDAs and, and things of that nature. Yeah. So it's interesting to see. And, the other thing is, obviously, we mentioned it, with changing conditions are a prime time for fewer deals to go through, especially when they've been negotiated prior to a significant change in condition, and then they're supposed to close post, or maybe they're in the works and haven't even signed, but, there's been initial offers, LOIs, letters of intent, term sheets, whatever, exchanged, and then somebody's got to retrade the deal, not because they're a bad person, but because the economic situation has changed. Yeah, so listen, I would say if you are, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably, I assume you're interested in deals. If some of those deals are M&A deals, I think it's always good to read about what the public, what's happening in the public deals. There are some instructive lessons, there. And this particular deal in a market where there have been other pressures, is interesting. And listen, taking a 40% hit, First Horizon taking a 40% hit on their stock, which, was already down at 15, which sounds like it was lower than it had been previously due to, I'm sure, what's going on in the banking market. Then them to take a 40% hit off that down to 9 a share since the merger was terminated, at least as of the time, I was reading this. And who knows, by the time we launch this, but maybe, it'll be interesting to see where the stock is, right? Maybe they will have rebounded. But the point is that's a huge hit in value, in market cap. So there have been consequences of a deal not going through. It's one of the things you want to take into account. Obviously, if a deal is the right thing for you to do and, you have the right buyer, you're not going to let that stop you, which you are going to try to mitigate those things in various ways, including, like I said, at least there's a breakup fee here. Now, I don't know. 200 million sounds like a lot, or 225 million with the reimbursement of fees. Sounds like a heck of a lot of money, but, in the context of these deals, I think they mentioned here, I'm taking a quick look on the market cap of the two companies. Oh, yeah, so here we go. So TD Bank, so the purchase price is going to be 13.4 billion with a B. So think about that. 200 million sounds like a lot of money. But in the scope of a $13.4 billion deal, it's really not. So, it's some consolation for the deal not going through, but maybe less than you would think. So, folks, you doing deals, try to mitigate the risk of a deal, not going forward the best you can. but understand that's always going to be a risk of doing the deal, and there'll be some consequences to it. All right, folks, until next week when we'll have a great guest interview, and 4 episodes from now when we'll have our next solo cast, I'll say goodbye and wish you all the best with all your deals coming up. Take care.